Hello and good evening, everyone. This is Suzanne Knabe-Nicole from Police Science Doctor. Police Science Doctor is an online resource where police and law enforcement practitioners from all over the world can get information on what's working in police science and how they can use academic findings in the fields of investigative psychology, criminology, forensic psychology, all that good stuff, how that can actually be applied in their job. So I translate some of these research findings into actionable tips. I send them out to my email list every Tuesday. They're called Police Science Snippets. If you would like to be on that email list, you can. It's free. Just go to policesciencedoctor.com and enter your details in the pop-up form or the form at the bottom of each page. Another thing I do is I speak to people who are either experts or practitioners that I think have something valuable to share. And on Thursday evenings, I sometimes get together with such a one person and to interview them and let them share everything they've got to tell you. So tonight we're going to interview Gareth Keyte. He used to be a military man. He used to be a police officer. Everything was going well until it wasn't. And we're going to talk about how coaching helped him out of that. But just before I get to that, would like to let you know, for everyone who's missed it, that last week we had the amazing, if I do say so myself, mental health and policing webinar. There was a live event and we had 12 speakers from a lot of different countries come and talk about the issues and challenges that we're facing with mental health and policing, but also what potential solutions are. Now, I'm actually going to put something here in the comments in the chat. If you want to see the webinar, you can watch the replay, you can watch the whole thing, you can see one of the two parts, and you can actually watch every person's contribution separately. Another thing that I was talking about recently is the that course that the Police Science Doctor Academy is releasing soon. Is actually, the enrollment is closing on the 18th of June. This is the Emergency Stress Pit Stop. This is an online course that can be taken discreetly by anyone who works in policing or used to work in policing and would like to be able to control their stress response, because stress can take over your life and your work. Your performance can go down. You can really spiral down into depression. The person who's created the course and the person who will be teaching you is an ex-frontline cop, Ginny McKenna. And she not only understands the job of policing, she also understands everything bad that comes with it. It drove her almost to suicide. So she had severe depression, severe anxiety. She got her way out of it. And what she's doing now is she's providing the help to people like you, law enforcement practitioners. She's providing the help that she didn't have at the time. So she really gets it. She really gets the job, and she can help people out of it. So if you want to have more information on Emergency Stress Pit Stop, that first course we're going to have the Academy, I'm just putting the link into the comments here so you can check that out later after the interview. Right, so what I'd like to get to now is actually bring in Gareth Keyte. So good evening, Gareth.
Good evening, Suzanne. Thanks ever so much for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. Tell us about your military and policing career.
Well, as you probably tell by my accent, I was born and brought up in South Wales, and it's a small town that I lived in. And the way I was brought up, the values that my mum and dad instilled in me and my brother, we wanted to kind of make our own way in the world. So I left home at 19 and joined the Marines. Traveled the world, had lots of great adventures, and I learned an awful lot about myself. In particular, the things that played to my strengths around camaraderie, looking out for my colleagues and my teammates, being selfless, positivity when times got tough. And I learned a lot about my mental and physical resilience and how to increase it. So, I was in pretty good shape by the time I was 23. I was getting married, planned to have children. So I didn't really feel that life in the military was conducive to being a positive role model for me, my values. I'm not criticizing anybody else, but I didn't want to be in the military and be a dad who's away a lot of the time. So I joined the police at 23. And I nearly left after 6 months because my experience of the culture in the police in terms of loyalty and camaraderie was very, very different from what I experienced in the Marines. It wasn't as a higher standard of loyalty. But I persevered. It was my new career, and I adjusted to my new surroundings. And within a couple of years, after getting through my probationary period, I became a detective very early on in my career, and worked in intelligence for a number of years, covert policing, then the next step into serious and organised crime, before I got promoted to sergeant and inspector, I loved being a cop. Absolutely loved it. I was a round peg in a round hole. Every day was different, and I loved being such a positive role model to my kids and my friends and my family. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. That was my stepping stone into last year when I left.
So it's quite interesting. You mentioned earlier that you learned how to keep yourself mentally well. How were you coping with all the traumatic things that you were seeing in your police job?
Well, the Marines kind of taught me physical and mental resilience, as I said, and the culture in police I found was that this is the job. Suck it up, buttercup. The expectation is you'll become desensitized over time if anything's causing you too much stress or anxiety. And certainly when I joined in the late 90s, that there was some unhelpful attitudes for people who didn't feel that they were coping very well, that you can always leave. I remember a particularly unsympathetic sergeant who I worked alongside, when referring to a female colleague who was struggling with stress, what we refer to now as stress. He said, if you're down and feeling blue, remember, you joined us, we didn't join you. Particularly unhelpful. She didn't feel supported at all. But it was just the culture at the time. And thankfully, we've made great strides in kind of overcoming that. And those people have probably left or are wheedled out now, but a few remain. Going to sudden deaths as a sergeant, you go to every sudden death as a shift sergeant, and as an SIO, I worked in CID for a number of years as well. So you deal with the kind of, the real awful things that one person could do to another. And
can I just pause here for international viewers or people not in policing? SIO is Senior Investigating Officer, so that's a person of a higher rank who's in charge of investigations. CID is Criminal Investigation Department. That's where the detective sits in the UK. Carry on.
I should learn my lesson from that, shouldn't I? So having to explain acronyms. So also during that period as well, I had when I was in the Serious and Organised Crime Unit, I had threats made against my family, my young family. That was kind of a bit worrying and stressful. But on the whole, I didn't really feel that I was affected that much by the operational stuff that I was dealing with. In myself, consciously, I felt I was able to deal with it. And I prided myself on being able to outsuffer anybody else. And I think that came from my upbringing and my military background. So I felt I was able to deal with anything that life or the job threw at me. I probably drank maybe a bit too much, not on duty, but when I was off duty, probably used drink as a self-soothing mechanism to kind of deal with stressful things, perhaps, especially when things began to get tough in the latter part of my career.
And then what happened to make it all go wrong if you were handling things so well?
I've tried to over the last couple of years. I've really tried to reflect on what the turning points were, and I think getting promoted was a big part of that. Seeing a different side of policing when you become a supervisor or leader. When I got promoted to sergeant and then inspector, I didn't really like. There were some people who, whilst climbing the promotion ladder, they'd compromise their integrity in favour of ambition. So they would turn a blind eye to things or be unsympathetic. The people we all know who they are, the people who are promoted beyond their capabilities. You'd like to think in private sector organisations, if people are going to be promoted, then they've got to have at least some good communication skills, be compassionate or have some emotional intelligence. But I found not too many, because it would be dead easy for me to sling mud at policing coming from the other side now. But the majority of people I work with were really, really good and effective. But there were people who slipped through the net who were quite happy to punish colleagues for making well-meaning mistakes and not allowing them to learn from them. And that creates a culture of fear, and paranoia. I'm to look over your shoulder. Is someone going to scrutinize what I'm doing? Do I not have the freedom to fail? And I remember one of my first mentors. When I decided to go for a promotion, I had a detective chief inspector who put an arm around my shoulder and gave me some sage advice. One of which was, you've got to look after your colleagues and your staff. Allow people the freedom to fail and learn from their mistakes. But that didn't always translate, because he was one of the few people who kind of pushed that agenda and encouraged me to do so. And I took that with me through my leadership roles. But lack of leadership continuity definitely played a part. Being catapulted into jobs you know nothing about, and that happens right across policing, especially for people who've got aspirations for senior leadership. They call it lateral development. So in order to be an effective senior leader, the belief is that you have to have dipped your toe in other areas of policing, without not necessarily knowing the nuts and bolts of how it's delivered, and that fosters imposter syndrome, which we're learning more and more about. And you throw that in with that fear of culture, imposter syndrome, people fear of being found out, that they're not as knowledgeable as they purport, because that uniform can act as a shield of steel. No one will question the rank very often. Truth to power, my last force used to preach from the top down, but doesn't necessarily translate. Sometimes uncomfortable truths don't want to be heard. But for me, in answer to your question, where it all went wrong, so I felt capable of dealing with the day-to-day stuff. I didn't like the way things were done as you climbed the ranks. However, I had to accept it, play the game, if you like. But for me, it was taking a stand against a sadistic and spiteful superintendent, who unfortunately was my second line manager at the time. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And his treatment of fragile colleagues, my colleagues, people who I was responsible for, cracking a performance whip that was unnecessary, unsympathetic and uncaring, trying to get results no matter what, regardless of the human effect, really, really offended my values, my personal values and my leadership style. So I took a stand. I brought it to the attention, and when he wouldn't listen, I brought it to the attention of those with the power to stop or ease the suffering of my colleagues, and their lack of action ensured that behaviour went unchecked for 4 years in a number of roles as well. But so because I stood up against him, because those were my values and those were my beliefs, and I felt I had the strength to be able to do that, because I wasn't doing anything wrong or being disrespectful. I did everything with being in a polite and courteous manner. I refused to be intimidated by this person. Hindsight's a great thing, but I stood my ground and protected my staff under constant pressure that this person put on me, trying to undermine me professionally and put me in my place. But I refused, I mentioned earlier about, I refused to compromise my values and my integrity for ambition, just to get results. So supporting my colleagues who were struggling mentally and emotionally gave me the strength to carry on. And that was the best part of my job. I was a people person. I loved my leadership roles because I worked with some amazing people. And, when you support them in the right environment, they can just be absolutely amazing, and they'll walk through walls for you. But policing is hard enough without having to look over your shoulder, isn't it? And for me, I'm to go out on the ground in my various roles, senior investigating officer or PSU commander, or if I was on call for whatever other reason. If I went out on the ground, the job is hard enough when you're going into risk and threat situations. But having to look over your shoulder in the workplace as well created hypervigilance for me and paranoia. Throw in a divorce during that same period as well, wasn't easy. Suicidal staff, lack of sleep for me, then worrying about the situation at work and at home, worry, stress. And I fell hard eventually. I reached a tipping point, and I didn't know what was happening. And it scared me to death. I'd never been in that situation before. And for the first time in 25 years, I had to take a sustained period of time off work. It was 6 weeks initially. And I didn't understand what was going on with me. But again, part of the police culture, unsympathetic as it is, people with well-meaning intent say the best thing for you is to get back to work, get back on the horse, be amongst familiar friends. Otherwise, the longer you're off, you're going to get, de-skilled. It's going to be harder for you to return, and it's instilling that fear of returning back or being off for too long and recuperating of taking the time you need to recover. And later on, I was diagnosed. I had to pay for this myself because I couldn't afford to wait. I just didn't know what was going on with me. So I was diagnosed with PTSD linked to these events that were not operational. It was 4 or 5 years of, standing up to, someone whose behaviour fell far below the standard of police officers, and the office that we hold, and the lack of support from the organisation. I just felt awful. My hard drive was full. The way my best friend describes it, your hard drive's full, Gaz. You can't take in any more information. I was unable to process complex information. Simple things became so difficult. And Dawn, my soon-to-be wife, over the last 3 or 4 years, she'd been living this journey with me. Often would say, "You're not present with us." And I know a lot of people who listen to this would recognize that. Some of the symptoms I'm describing: lack of sleep, hypervigilance, not being able to make decisions, reliance on lists. I've got a list in front of me now, things in case I dry up. It's not because being interviewed, it's because I rely on having access to information in front of me so I can, explain myself in the way that I want to do. So, it was a very difficult time.
So that's quite interesting, because you have there were 2 levels that were going wrong, weren't there? There was the superintendent that you had to deal with. That's one thing. Then the fact that you had reported him and nothing was being done. So, there was another letdown on there. And I'm probably less surprised about the effect that this has had on you now than I would have been maybe before the mental health in policing webinar that I did last week, that I know you attended as well, because we had Dr. Jacqueline Drew from Australia talk about the fact that we're starting to now unpack trauma a little bit. We know that police officers are traumatized. We know that in the UK, 1 in 5 police officers already has PTSD symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder. Police officers are 5 times more likely than the general population to suffer from PTSD. So Dr. Jess Miller from Cambridge did this research for Police Care UK. So we know that. But actually, if you unpick the trauma, people think it's because of all the horrible things that police have to go to. That's the operational trauma now, as Gareth is saying here. He was actually able to handle that. And Dr. Drew told us last week at the webinar that the organizational stresses, poor leadership, poor resourcing, lack of support, working conditions, that can be twice as harmful for the mental health of a police officer as the traumatic events. And also the traumatic events we can't really protect our officers from. Somebody does have to go to this crime. Somebody does have to respond to this call, and it is the police. They have to, unfortunately, they have to experience all this trauma. We can't protect them from that. What we can do is we could prepare them for it mentally. We don't. We could then help them afterwards if they've been affected. We don't. Not enough anyway. But we could reduce or even remove the organizational stresses, how people are being treated in the police, because you're not talking about all the horrific things that you had to go to. You're talking about how you were being treated. You saw someone who was clearly in a position that was doing things he shouldn't be doing, and you reported that to people who could have done something about it, and they weren't supporting you, and then you became paranoid. So all this happened. These were organizational stresses that are not really part of the job. So that's quite interesting, this distinction that you've experienced there. And I don't want to be excited, but it's just a very good example of what we learned last week. But it's really bad that you had to go through it. But the viewers, I'm sure, would be interested as well in hearing how you made your way out of that. How did the story continue?
I think it's probably important to kind of I don't want to dwell too much on this, because I've made great strides in actually overcoming it. But for me, I really loved being a police officer. I mean, I couldn't wait to go to work a lot of the time. There were some roles that, I did that I wasn't really energized by, but I look back with fondness as a sergeant, particularly one of the most impactful ranks to have. And when I worked in the serious and organised crime unit, I couldn't wait to get to work in the morning. I took my parenting roles really, really seriously, but being a police officer was everything that I represented. I loved being this positive role model and being able to make a difference for people. But when I needed help and support, the organisation that I loved so much, I just felt it didn't love me back enough to support me when I really needed it, and it made me feel that I no longer belonged. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly show you this comment. So Jim Nixon is watching on Facebook. He's the host of the Community Safety Podcast. There's a lot of poor leadership in policing, a lack of care and compassion. And this is exactly what happened to me. This guy talks a lot of sense. Gareth, you're talking a lot of sense, apparently.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, Jim. But, I had these whole, feelings that I would never, ever have related to my job as a police officer, my love of this kind of career. I felt betrayed, definitely broken, and I didn't understand why. I felt isolated, and I isolated myself. A lot of embitterment. We talk about post-traumatic embitterment disorder. It's not recognised so much over here yet, but across the water, it is. I was down and depressed and ashamed. I mean, we've had conversations about Brené Brown. I would encourage anybody to look on YouTube and look at her TED Talks when she talks about, shame. For me as a man, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen for women either, but, I was brought up with around strong male role models. My first career in the military was a male-dominated environment, strong male role models having to perform and act in a certain way. In the police as well, I know it's changing, but generally a patriarchal kind of structure. I felt that I needed to be big and strong, a protector, and not show any weakness. And I felt terribly, terribly ashamed that I had this unseen illness. There's more to be had. There's kudos sometimes amongst men in sporting an injury, a black eye, a busted tooth, or a broken arm when you've done your job and you've kind of you're fighting for your job or for people who can't protect themselves. And I just felt inadequate, and I didn't want to go to work. I was struggling with all these feelings. So I just wanted to kind of underline that really, Suzanne, before I kind of went on to, I think the other question was, how did I find a way out?
Yeah.
So for me, it was coaching, so particularly NLP coaching. I'm not going to explain what NLP is, but I can explain coaching. But, at first, though, when I described it as falling off my perch, broken, scared, very emotional, not understanding what was going on with me. And before I got my diagnosis, because as I said, I paid for my own diagnosis with a psychiatrist to get assessed as to what was going wrong with me, because effectively everybody was just saying it's just a bit of stress. And how often do we hear that? Just a bit of stress, bit of time off. Have you got some leave you can take? God forbid that you should have to go sick, but take some leave. And I had in 18 months, I had over 30 sessions of psychotherapy with a wonderful, wonderful doctor of forensic psychology, a lady called Tracy Lavis, who's an expert in trauma. And I remember my first meeting when I went in there, looking not disheveled, because I could wash myself and clean myself and all that, but my body language was one of a person with no confidence. I was kind of shrinking away from the world. I had a hat on and a hoodie, and it was the middle of the summer, and I sat in her office, and she reminded me, months later, the change in my physiology, because I was starting to discover what was going on with me. And so those therapy sessions were fantastic in helping me to understand why my body and my brain was reacting the way that it was to the trauma I was facing. We went back into some very difficult traumatic periods, not just in the workplace, but into my youth and, in later life as well, that were unassociated with the workplace, but were in there, as key emotional events during my life. which formulated my beliefs and everything else, stuff that I understand now, having learned coaching myself. But I surrounded myself with positive people, which was really, really important for me. And I started to be more compassionate to myself. I said earlier on that I could outsuffer anybody. I used to say to my ex-wife, you know, I would live in a cardboard box as long as the kids and she had everything that they needed, because I felt that was what I was prepared to do. You know, kind of, you know, I would sacrifice anything for them, and I would sacrifice anything for my team around me and the people that I worked alongside. So being compassionate to myself was really, really important. Journaling, I'd never done journaling before, never even wrote in a diary until this point. And Dawn, my soon-to-be wife, I'll just refer to her as my wife because she will be in a couple of months' time. She introduced me to journaling and establishing a routine in the morning that wasn't lying in bed and hiding under the covers. You know, eating healthily, drinking water rather than beer. I still drink beer every now and then, but you know, my consumption had gone down massively. But staying hydrated, getting out in the fresh air. You know, my best friend talks about we're our happiest when we've got, you know, the air in our lungs and the grass under our feet, and you can lose sight of that in policing a lot. The balance is out of kilter, and meditation to help me sleep because I wasn't sleeping well at all. I'd stay awake all night, ruminating, thinking about all the things that had happened, and I was just, again, what I know now is, you know, you can't change the past. You can only think and feel differently about it. But I didn't have the tools to allow me to do it, which coaching allowed me to do. So I discovered coaching with Dawn as a passing interest, and went on this awareness day, and it just opened my eyes to a new way of thinking. I was able to be a client of coaching then, you know, after all the 30 sessions that I'd had, which helped me understand what was happening to me, but not the root causes. I was still carrying that around. It was unfinished business, if that makes any sense. And I was carrying around anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, shame. It was crippling shame. It was awful. I can get choked just thinking about, you know, the place I was in. It was in a deep, dark hole, and I just didn't know how to get out of it. But coaching also allowed me to deal with the internal conflicts I had. How can an organization I love so much treat me so badly, turn their back on me in my hour of need repeatedly? It wasn't just once, it was over 4 years. And like this, giving this bloke a free pass because he was a senior officer and they'd promoted him. So they were somehow responsible for putting that person in that position. So I definitely had a victim mindset, and I was at the effect of anything and everybody around me. You know, this wasn't my fault. You know, I had a true heart, I felt. And why was this happening to me? And coaching allowed me to flip that on its head and have a growth mindset. You can be better. You can be focused on the future. So it was really life-changing for me, the coaching, and it helped me climb out of the hole that I was in. And the coaches who helped me and then went on to teach me how to be a coach, and then to becoming a master coach and running my own company. I started my own company last year. Was they knew how far to reach into that hole to help me climb out, and I had to be the one to climb out. And it gave me the strength to move on, recover, have a future, new sense of purpose, and restore some balance. So,
could you explain to us the difference between therapy or counseling and coaching? Because I don't think that's really clear to most people.
So, I'll give you my own experience of it, which I can draw a distinction, and I do not say which one's better, because without those 30 sessions with Dr. Tracy, I wouldn't have recovered in the way that I did. I wouldn't have been open to trying new things around coaching. So traditional talk therapies and psychotherapies and counseling really do work. And having someone who will listen to you without judgment and offer insight as to what's going on is absolutely invaluable. But for me, so coaches don't offer advice. They help you discover the skills, the values, and the strategies that you're not using, that we all have. It allowed me to discover a new perspective, a new view of myself, where I was going wrong. And this is what we do for other people as well, where you're going wrong. And you have to find out for yourself through some examination of yourself through the coaching techniques that we use, and how to change. Change is a really important part of it. And I draw this distinction here as well. There's plenty of people who need therapy, counseling or coaching, but there are people, then you've got to want it. You've got to want to change. You've got to want to embrace it. You can't be sent there. And that's what is another thing that happens in policing. People are sent for therapy. People are sent to look for some magic pill and go, we've done our bit, tick the box, and we're going to send you off there and you're going to get help. And the focus in coaching as well is on your future, your growth, and becoming better. So the biggest lesson for me was having let go of all that emotional baggage, the unfinished business, and the internal conflicts, and these beliefs that I'd made about myself. I'd created a belief, a lack of self-belief, lack of self-confidence, and that was never me. The little boy who believed he could be anything was gone, but now was coming back through coaching. So I couldn't change the past. I could still remember the past. I could probably, if I tried, engage with the feelings of the past, which were appropriate at the time, but because I wasn't letting them go, that was affecting my future behavior. So now with coaching allows me, has allowed me, and would allow anybody who chooses coaching as a way to overcome some of these things, allows you to think and feel differently about the past and let all that stuff go.
How do you think police feel about coaching, and why?
I don't think they understand it. I really don't think they understand coaching. I've given an explanation there, and I've had to explain what coaching is to people. It means different things to different people, and you can explain it, or you can show people how coaching works and give some examples. But in the police, coaching and mentoring is used in the same sentence. I would be very surprised if any more than 10% of the people in policing who actually use the words coaching and mentoring actually could make the distinction. I've worked with some very, very enlightened talent management people in my old force who understand coaching, and they coach very, very well for people who are future leaders. But again, there is another failing there as well, because the senior leaders all get coaching. They all get coaching at a certain level, and they call it executive coaching, and those who understand coaching. So your coaching client determines how you refer to yourself as a coach. So if you only coach exec people, you'll call yourself an exec coach. You could be an exec coach coaching someone from GlaxoSmithKline or from West Mercia Police or the Met, or from from Amazon. They won't be experts in running those companies. They are coaches who look to get the best from you, change the one thing that will make you the best version of yourself. Coaching and mentoring, I used to really grind my gears when I was serving. When I had my eyes open to the distinction between coaching and mentoring. I was in the beginning part of my coaching journey, but unfortunately the tail end of my career, and I requested to go on a College of Policing coaching event, a one-day event at Greater Manchester Police Headquarters, and I was really looking forward to getting some insightful coaching, Jedi mind tricks, or some coping strategies that I could pass on to my colleagues, because I hadn't advanced myself in my own personal development, the stuff I was paying for myself in learning new coaching techniques. And we spent the whole day talking about getting into rapport with people, how to get into rapport, and exercising, getting into rapport and talking with people, mirroring and matching people's body language, etc., which is a coaching technique, and very, very useful when you're kind of speaking with people and engaging, or maybe conflict management. And that was it at the end of the day. And then we were told that we were coaches, and then we were told to go out there and over the next year to find 3 people who we could coach and support through career progression in the police. Not to be better cops, better communicators, better interviewers, more compassion, more self-awareness. None of that. It was about supporting people to get through the ranks. I just found it bizarre that they're missing the trick. So in answer to your question, I just don't think they understand it really, Suzanne.
That's interesting, a little bit worrying that, well, the thing is with coaching, everyone can call themselves a coach. It's not very regulated, is it? And it's like you said, you can decide yourself what your title is. You could be an executive coach, you could maybe be a chef's coach, a mechanics coach, and yes, and maybe that doesn't help the reputation, but there are those that are really skilled at it. And I would, if I could have a go at, what I understand the distinction to be between coaching and mentoring, I would say that coaching, like you say, a coach doesn't give advice. They basically work with you for you to generate the answers and for you to help you generate the tools. Mentoring is very much instructive, quite directly saying how you should be doing it and, teaching you. Telling you what to do. That would be my understanding. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, there's this, and then we get consultants come in as well who. So I think as a coach, personally, coaches are as invested in the outcome for you. Very compassionate people, coaches. They're as invested in you making progress as they are. Being proud of the skills that they have to take you on that journey. I described to someone the other day around, we've got the two of us online here now, and anybody who's listening to this now or in the future, we could all be at the same crime scene. And that's the difficult job of police officers. We've all been there. We'll take the names of 5 or 6, witnesses at the scene, and they all see something different from that scene. Yeah, which can be frustrating when you're trying to get to the truth. But actually, it's that person's perception of the world. I might be focusing on a moving vehicle or a threat from a different area, a different part of the scene, whereas someone else might be focusing on the victim, the weather, or anything else that's going on there as well. So I describe coaches as the map builder. My map to my territory wouldn't be any good for you. If I gave you my map of how I see the world and asked you to come make your way out of it based on how you see the world, they just don't translate. They don't translate at all.
What do you think would need to happen for more police officers to take up coaching to improve their well-being?
Well, we've had this discussion before, and I personally feel that policing, therefore chief officers, PCCs, they're not called HR anymore, wherever they're called now, the departments that oversee all of that, including occupational health, need to look at the evidence, because the evidence is there, but it's not shouted from the rooftops, is it? That proactive investment will save them money. So that will increase trust and confidence of your staff, because at the moment they don't feel that they're a priority when they're being broken, and they're, the stuff that's being provided at the moment. You've got occupational health teams that are crippled. They just haven't got the staff to kind of support the number of staff who are broken. The demand outstrips, the supply of support that they need. So an effective prevent strategy, I feel, and the evidence supports it. So we preach to people. I say we. This is the police. We preach crime prevention to avoid becoming a victim of a crime. And we know that it costs more to investigate a crime than it does to prevent it. So that's a simple analogy that anybody in policing can understand. The same applies to mental health and emotional health crisis. So 2 bits of information. I love this because you can't deny it. It's not the world according to Gareth Keyte. It's not the world according to the many broken police officers and police staff members out there, or anybody else who's broken as a result of mental health. This is Monitor Deloitte, a worldwide expert company in their field. They've done tremendous research across the piece around it for employers, justifying an evidence base for investment in mental health support and education, not retrospectively, proactively. So I'll share it with you. I think I've shared it with you, but it'd be useful to share with anybody who's watching this, or just look up Monitor Deloitte, the investment in mental health, the revised figures. And it says that the return of investment for every pound invested in this, you save £5. So that's one statistic. When I was off poorly in order to try and keep my mind active, I did a freedom of information request because I was a statistic. I was told that you're one of many people who are struggling with occupational stress. So I wanted to see how bad it was, how bad, am I the exception to the rule or not? I knew I wasn't, but I did a freedom of information request across 43 police forces, 35 responded. And I asked, amongst other things, what was the total number of working days lost to psychological illness that people would own up to as well? Because there were plenty of times that people like me would have gone, I'd rather take a rest day in lieu or an annual leave day than admit that I was struggling with stress, or would say, I wouldn't say it, but I think 1 or 2 occasions where I've gone, I'm not feeling very well, and today I'm not going to go in and I'll just say that I've got like stomach flu or whatever it would be, because it wasn't it was a slight exaggeration. I was poorly, but actually the real thing was I was struggling with my stress, and that happens a lot. So, but across the piece, psychological illness associated with policing, 550,000 working days lost pre-COVID. So you could, because COVID's a convenient excuse for forces now as well. Oh, there's a lot of stress across the world with COVID. This was up to March last year, pre-pandemic, and the year leading up to that, March 2019 to 2020. So that was the scale of the problem in policing. I'd be intrigued to see whether the police forces actually respond to the FOI that we're doing this year. And then just finally, to give some anecdotal evidence of the cost of not being proactive. Before I left, I was 12 months off work. I was off work for 12 months. It cost them £55,000 in wages and probably about £3,000 to £4,000 in treatment. If I'd have gone back, I'd have been back on reduced hours and a phased return to work. That's presenteeism. It's only a phrase I picked up 2 weeks ago. I hadn't even heard of it until then. Presenteeism being you're at work, but you're not productive, either because you're ill, you're unable to do your job, you're ill, or you're recovering. So that's a cost to the organisation. So for me, so that's £58,000, £59,000 it cost them for me to be off work, and someone else would have been doing my job as well. So that's just one example of, if you'd invested early on, gave me the tools to be able to understand this, the knowledge I've got now, I want to be able to pass that on to people, for them to be able to help themselves and avoid going through what I've gone through, a career that I absolutely loved. I felt at the time ripped from me. I now see it. I've got a different viewpoint on it now. I've been presented with a fantastic opportunity to show that the experience I've gathered over the last 25 years is not going to go to waste. I've got a third career now where I can help people, and I'm passionate about it, and plays to my strengths the fact that I'm an empath. I want to help other people. I want to help people not go through, this painful experience, and I want to help policing get there as well. I just hope that they sit up and sit up and take notice. So, because if cops want coaching at the moment, unless they're a senior leader, they have to pay for it. So, as I said, only senior leaders get coaching as it stands at the moment as part of their CPD through the College of Policing. So I think policing is missing a trick by making it exclusive just to senior ranks. Make it accessible to all. You can do it. Or if you're prepared to keep on paying 550,000 work days a year for people to be off, or you're not interested in a 1 in 5 ratio return of investment for investing in this, then carry on doing what you've always done, and you'll always get what you've always got.
Tell us briefly about your coaching company.
So I set up Oxygen Coaching Company with Dawn last year. She's a business coach anyway, but we wanted it to be inclusive for all, so people in the private and the public sector. And I started with the intention of really, really wanting to support blue light colleagues in the military, and learned my coaching craft, retrained alongside managing myself, which is kind of really important, because even though coaching's helped me kind of let go of some of those demons from the past, I'm nowhere near at the operating level that I was. So I'm staying in my lane, in my specialism. I'm not a policing jack of all trades now. I'm kind of a specialist in this area. So what Oxygen does, so we've got 4 coaches, including myself, and I prefer to work with men. I can say that now that I left the police. I'd have been called a sexist, I suppose, if I was still in the police and said I only want to work with men. But, you know, those are my strengths. Those are the people I connect with. And I've walked many miles in the shoes of the men that I work with. Saying that, I do coach a number of women as well. Dawn and the other coaches, we split between our areas of responsibility. And this summer, I'm really promoting men's health and well-being, and for the men who are, you know, experiencing some of the things that I've experienced: self-doubt, limiting beliefs about themselves, not feeling good enough, isolating, behavioral change, maybe seeking support or self-soothing, alcohol, you know, drugs, prescription or illegal, gambling, spending money that you don't have, all of those kind of things that we do because there's something underlying, there's something that we're not addressing. We help them address that through coaching. So there's a number of things that we do. We do weekend retreats, we do group coaching, and we do individual one-on-one coaching, as well as business development coaching as well, which is Dawn and Jamie, one of the other partners, their area of expertise.
If you could make one change, if you had a magic wand and you could make one change in policing, what would it be? Proactivity. I'm going to say it for the 3rd time: proactive support, coaching support for all of those in policing from the beginning. Baby bobbies, student officers, the guys and girls now who are coming through on the professional policing degrees. I really do feel for those guys who are having their degree paid for because they're working through their degree. They're under the stress of learning the job, as well as their academic stresses as well. I understand the benefit of that is because you're not anchored to that debt that most people, when they go for a conventional degree, have to apply for a loan, student loan, to be able to pay for it. There is the pre-join degree as well, which seems wholly more sympathetic to the changing lifestyle that these people are going to experience when they join the police. But yeah, proactive coaching support and proper coaching support to complement what already exists for those who are broken or feeling broken, who are already in the job. So provide a common standard of education and understanding in terms of mental health. And, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Sam Smith from the Green Ribbon campaign, who is campaigning tirelessly for this. He's got a captive audience now as well. And for those of you who are unaware of him, either on LinkedIn, social media, reach out to Sam and look at the great work that they're doing. Just like those of us who every year had to do our officer safety training refresh. Now he's looking for a common standard of mental health education and support across policing that's refreshed every year. So you have the skills, the current skills, and a reminder that you are vulnerable to these things because of the nature of the job that you do. So does that answer your question, Suzanne? Yeah. To bring this to a close, if people only took away one thing from this interview and from what you've said, what would you want that one thing to be?
Reach out to you, to Ginny, or keep on following what you're doing, because what you're doing is fantastic. And I'm sure the following will grow. So you asked for one thing, but the one thing it's a plea to chief officers and heads of people and organizational development, I think is the title now, which covers the whole gambit of HR, and occupational health, etc. Now they all know the true cost of psychological illness in their particular force. They've got the figures, they've got the business analysis done, and they know the true cost because they're measured on it. So knowing that your return of investment from investing in a proactive mental health support program, an education program, giving your frontline workers, the people on the coal face, the tools to be able to deal with what they're going to be exposed to, 5-to-1 ratio. Invest in it, invest to save. Why wouldn't you try something innovative and show your staff that you really care? Because otherwise, you're going to push them out the door, embittered, broken, and then limited as to what they're going to be able to do going forward. Because it's a wonderful job in policing. It's the most rewarding, but it can be the most punishing as well.
Gareth Keyte, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps, and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main website on policesciencedoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.